The funeral was an understated affair, just the way Maggie would have wanted it, simple, elegant, and quietly reverent. Charleston's late summer sun hung low in the sky, casting golden light across the old family estate as we gathered beneath the massive oak tree where my mother, Maggie Robson, was finally laid to rest. The air smelled of jasmine and the faint tang of salt from the marshlands beyond. The Robson home, grand, stately, and crumbling in ways only the heart could see, had stood in this city for over a century, and now the last Robson matriarch had departed. I stood apart from the crowd, my hands buried in the pockets of my suit pants, and stared at the simple wooden casket as it was lowered into the ground. My mother's legacy was palpable. She'd been a pillar of strength, a force, a woman who commanded the respect of everyone she encountered. Even at 89, she carried herself with a dignity that made you feel like you were standing in the presence of history itself. Yet, I knew my siblings weren't thinking of Maggie's quiet strength or her impact on Charleston's community. James stood beside Hannah, whispering something in her ear as the pastor droned on about the fleeting nature of life. I couldn't hear what they said, but I knew the look in their eyes all too well, calculating, eager. They were thinking about the inheritance. About the fortune my mother had amassed over decades of savvy investments and the sprawling estate she had maintained through sheer willpower. Maggie had been wealthy, yes, but wealth was never what defined her. That's what they never understood. When the service ended, the family lawyer, Mr. Warren, approached us, his leather briefcase clutched under one arm. He had a presence about him that matched the Robson name, polished, with an old-world Southern charm, but I could see the weight of the task in his eyes. There were few things harder than executing a will that would undoubtedly tear a family apart. "Ryan," he greeted me with a nod, his voice low and respectful. "Are you ready?" I wasn't sure I ever could be. My siblings and I had drifted apart over the years, even though we still shared the same bloodline, the same memories. The reading of this will, I suspected, would be the final nail in whatever fractured bond we still had. Mr. Warren motioned us inside the Robson home, where the heavy drapes had been drawn, casting long, shadowed fingers across the high ceilings and time-worn floors. The grandeur of the house was undeniable, but it always felt like a relic, something caught in a time warp. It was beautiful, but like all beautiful things left to age, it had secrets buried in the walls. As we gathered around the long mahogany table in the study, my siblings appeared almost impatient, like children waiting for Christmas morning, certain they'd find treasures under the tree. They had no idea what was coming. Mr. Warren cleared his throat. "Your mother left very specific instructions about her estate," he began, flipping open a thick packet of papers. "Before any of you are eligible to inherit, you must complete 2 challenges she has set forth, both of which will test your intelligence and, more importantly, your honesty." I heard James snicker softly beside me. "What is this, some kind of game?" he muttered, but Warren's eyes were cold, his voice stern when he responded. "It's not a game, James. It's your mother's last wish." Hannah crossed her arms, her lips twisted in disbelief. Mother was many things, but I don't remember her being a fan of riddles or tests. "This seems ridiculous." Mr. Warren didn't flinch. "Regardless of what you may think, these are the terms. You will each face 2 challenges. If you succeed, you will receive your share of the estate. If not..." He let the words hang in the air like the musty smell of forgotten years that clung to the house. I glanced at James, who was fidgeting, tapping his fingers on the table, while Hannah's face was a mask of quiet fury. I could feel the tension brewing, an invisible line drawn between us all, a line that had been there long before our mother passed. And now, the weight of inheritance would pull us further apart, or crush us. "The first challenge," Mr. Warren continued, "involves 3 boxes, only one of which holds something of value. The other 2, well, they contain something far more dangerous." The sun had long set by the time we reconvened in the Robson family vault, deep beneath the house. The air was cool, musty, and the faint hum of distant machinery buzzed in my ears. It had always been a place of mystery, this old vault, built by my great-grandfather to store the family's most valuable possessions. But now, it felt more like a chamber of secrets, a crypt waiting to unearth truths we weren't ready to face. In the center of the room stood 3 identical wooden boxes, each roughly the size of a shoebox, placed carefully on a stone table. The room was otherwise bare, save for the flickering candlelight casting long shadows on the damp walls. "These boxes," Mr. Warren said, stepping forward, "represent the first challenge. 2 contain venomous creatures, one a snake, the other a scorpion. The third holds something of great value. Choose the wrong box, and you will face the consequences." I could hear Hannah inhale sharply, her breath quickening, and James. Well, he had the audacity to look amused. "And what's the catch?" James asked, folding his arms across his chest. "I assume we don't just get to pick willy-nilly." "You will have one hint," Mr. Warren said. "An old Robson family riddle." He pulled a small slip of paper from his breast pocket and read aloud. "3 boxes lie before you, but 2 shall bring you pain. The truth is often twisted, but fear not what remains. The key to choosing wisely is not in what you see, but what you know of shadows cast by your own legacy." James raised an eyebrow. "Cryptic." Hannah shot me a glance, and I could see the doubt flickering in her eyes. For once, she wasn't so sure of herself. Good, I thought. Maybe for once, this wasn't going to be a game of who could manipulate whom. It was going to be about something bigger. I, too, was filled with uncertainty, but I knew this was more than a test of intelligence. This was about character. Maggie had always taught us that the greatest dangers weren't the ones you could see, they were the ones you ignored. As I approached the table, my mind raced. The legacy. What had she meant by that? Suddenly, it hit me. The answer wasn't in the boxes, it was in our past. Our family's legacy wasn't built on deceit. Maggie had always valued truth, even when it was painful. And so, I made my choice. When the second challenge was revealed, a mirror maze hidden in the estate's east wing, it felt almost surreal. The maze was a relic from another time, a peculiar installation from the early 20th century, when parlor games and puzzles were all the rage among Charleston's elite. I hadn't set foot in it since I was a child, and even then, it felt like stepping into a fever dream, the kind of place that shifted as soon as you thought you understood its layout. "Only one of you needs to complete the maze," Mr. Warren explained, "but you must do so within the allotted time, and alone." Hannah's lips were tight, her face pale. "I hate mazes." James shrugged. "Seems easy enough. Just reflections, right?" But I knew better. This wasn't about navigating corridors. The mirror maze was about confronting yourself, every angle, every flaw, magnified 1,000 times. And if there was one thing I knew about James and Hannah, it was that they weren't ready to face who they truly were. As James confidently strode toward the entrance, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. This was the last hurdle. The last test. What none of us knew, not then, was that the maze wouldn't just reveal the truth about us, it would reveal a betrayal so deep, it would threaten to tear us apart forever. The entrance to the maze was an unassuming door tucked behind a forgotten tapestry in the east wing. When we were children, Maggie would tell us stories about the mirrors, how they weren't just glass, but portals to alternate realities. I had always thought she was simply indulging us in fairy tales, but standing here now, watching James strut toward the entrance with all the arrogance he could muster, I wondered if maybe she'd been hinting at something deeper all along. The maze was lit by dim, recessed lights that cast eerie shadows on the mirrored walls. It looked deceptively simple from the outside, just glass panes and reflections, but I knew better. The mirrors distorted reality, played tricks on your eyes, and made you question everything you thought you knew. James paused before stepping inside, glancing back at us with that smug grin that always made me want to throttle him. "Don't worry, I'll be out in no time," he said. Hannah watched him closely, her arms wrapped around herself as if she could ward off the growing tension between us. I could see the storm brewing in her expression, her jealousy of James, her resentment toward me. But there was something else there, something darker I couldn't quite place. Once James disappeared into the maze, Mr. Warren checked his watch. "He has 30 minutes. If he doesn't make it out in time, he'll forfeit." The air was thick with anticipation. Hannah paced, her heels clicking on the marble floor. I leaned against the wall, trying to steady my thoughts. This was no ordinary test. Maggie had designed these challenges to expose who we were at our core. It wasn't just about the fortune, she wanted to see if we were worthy of carrying on her legacy. Minutes ticked by, and my anxiety grew. There was no sound from within the maze, no indication of how far James had progressed. I glanced at Hannah. Her pacing had stopped, and she stood frozen, staring at something on her phone. A text. Her eyes darted to me, and she quickly stuffed the device back into her purse, but I caught the shift in her demeanor. Something had changed. "What is it?" I asked, my voice low. She looked at me, her lips tight. "Nothing." "Hannah, I know when you're lying." For a moment, I thought she might snap, that familiar fire in her eyes sparking to life, but instead, she gave me a tight-lipped smile. "You always think you know everything, Ryan. But some things are better left alone." Before I could press further, a loud crash echoed from the maze. The sound reverberated through the air, followed by a series of shattering noises. My heart skipped a beat. Something was wrong. Mr. Warren stepped forward, his brow furrowed in concern. "That shouldn't have happened." I moved toward the maze's entrance, instinct driving me. "We need to go in there." "Ryan, wait," Mr. Warren said, holding up a hand. "The challenge is meant to be completed alone." "I don't care," I snapped. "James is my brother." Hannah's face twisted into something unreadable, anger, fear, perhaps both. But she didn't stop me. Without another word, I pushed through the door and entered the maze. The moment I stepped inside, the world tilted. The walls of glass reflected back countless versions of myself, some tall, others warped, all staring at me with an intensity that made my stomach churn. It was disorienting, but I forced myself to move forward, trying to ignore the dizzying effect of the reflections. "James?" I called, my voice bouncing off the walls in a chorus of echoes. No answer. The maze twisted and turned in ways that didn't make sense. I'd walked down what seemed like a straight path, only to end up back where I started, my own reflection mocking me at every turn. The mirrors distorted more than just my appearance, they distorted my memories, my thoughts. I could see flashes of our childhood in the glass, James, Hannah, and me running through the house, Maggie watching us with that knowing smile of hers. But there were other images too. Darker ones. Images of James and Hannah, whispering in corners, plotting. They'd always been closer to each other than to me, united in their shared ambition, their hunger for power. I'd been the odd one out, the one who cared more about preserving the family's integrity than its wealth. Suddenly, I heard a noise up ahead, a faint, strangled sound, like someone gasping for air. "James," I shouted, my pulse quickening. I turned a corner and found him. He was crouched on the ground, clutching his leg, blood pooling beneath him. One of the mirrors had shattered, and a large shard was embedded deep in his calf. "Ryan." His voice was shaky, panicked. "It's a trap. The whole thing's a damn trap." I knelt beside him, trying to assess the damage. The wound was deep, but it wasn't fatal. "What happened?" James gritted his teeth, wincing as I applied pressure to the wound. "The mirrors. They're not just illusions. Some of them. They're rigged. I don't know how, but they break when you get too close." I didn't see it coming. I looked around, my mind racing. This wasn't just a simple challenge, it was designed to break us, both physically and mentally. "Hold on," I said, pulling off my jacket and wrapping it around his leg to stem the bleeding. "We're getting out of here." But as I helped him to his feet, something shifted in his expression, a flicker of guilt, or maybe shame. "There's something you don't know," he muttered, avoiding my gaze. I froze, the weight of his words sinking in. "What are you talking about?" James's eyes darted to the broken shards around us, then back to me. "Hannah and I. We didn't come here just for the will. We've been planning something." "We?" Before he could finish, a new voice cut through the maze, cold and sharp. "Ryan, stop." I turned to see Hannah standing at the entrance to the maze, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. She was holding something in her hand, a phone, its screen illuminated with a video. "What is this?" I asked, stepping toward her. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she held up the phone, and the video played. It was security footage, grainy but clear enough. James and Hannah, standing in Mr. Warren's office, days before the will was to be read. They were talking about the challenges, about ways to cheat, to manipulate the test so they'd both walk away with the largest shares of the fortune. It wasn't just a conspiracy, it was betrayal, plain and simple. I felt the air rush out of my lungs, my heart pounding in my chest. "You were going to cheat?" James didn't meet my gaze. "It wasn't supposed to be like this." Hannah's voice trembled. "Ryan, No." I shook my head, the anger rising in my throat like bile. "You both. After everything." I couldn't finish the sentence. The betrayal was too deep, too raw. Maggie had known. She'd anticipated this, and that's why she'd set these challenges. She wasn't testing our intelligence, she was testing our integrity. James stumbled, his face contorted in pain. "I'm sorry," he whispered, but the words felt hollow, empty. I turned my back on him, my mind racing. The fortune, the legacy, the house, it all meant nothing now. What mattered was what Maggie had known all along: trust, loyalty, honesty. And my siblings had failed her. I helped James out of the maze, but I knew then that everything had changed. When we emerged from the maze, Mr. Warren was waiting, his expression unreadable. He had seen the video, too. He knew the truth. "James, Hannah," he said calmly, "you are hereby disqualified from the inheritance. Your mother's instructions were clear. Deceit would not be rewarded." James slumped into a chair, his leg still bleeding, but the pain on his face wasn't from the wound, it was from the realization of what they had lost. Hannah said nothing, her face pale, her eyes glassy with the weight of her actions. I stood there, the reality settling over me like a heavy blanket. I had passed the test, but at what cost? My family was fractured beyond repair. Mr. Warren approached me, his voice soft. "Ryan, you are the sole inheritor of your mother's estate. She entrusted it to you, knowing you would honor her legacy." The words felt hollow in the dim light of the room. The fortune, the house, it meant nothing without the family we once were. But as I looked at James and Hannah, broken and defeated, I knew that this was my chance to rebuild. Not the wealth, not the estate, but us. The Robson family had been built on lies and secrets for too long. Maybe it was time for something new. "I don't want the money," I said quietly, and Mr. Warren looked at me, surprised. "Not all of it, at least." James's eyes flickered with confusion, and Hannah stared at me, her lips trembling. "I'll keep the house," I continued, "and I'll use the rest for something that matters. Schools, clinics, things that will help people, like Mom always wanted. But as for you two..." I paused, meeting their eyes. "I'm not giving you the money. But I will offer you something else: jobs, positions in the businesses we'll create. You can earn your way back. If you're willing to work for it." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then James, for the first time in what felt like years, nodded, his face softening. "I'll do it." Hannah's tears spilled over her cheeks, and she gave a small, broken smile. "Me too." And just like that, I realized Maggie's final test hadn't been about wealth at all. It had been about redemption. And in that moment, I knew we might just have a chance at it. If you like this story, please subscribe, like, click the bell, and leave a comment. Thank you in advance.